Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories.
Jennifer Langston had it all, or so it seemed. As the CEO of a successful tech company, she had climbed to the top of the corporate ladder, a self-made millionaire whose name was whispered in the corridors of the business elite. Her face graced the covers of magazines, and Forbes had dubbed her one of the women under 40 to watch. Yet, despite the accolades, something crucial was missing in her life. A connection, a true bond, something no amount of money or prestige could buy. Her ambition had driven her to the pinnacle of success, but it had also left destruction in its wake. She had burned bridges with friends, driven away assistants, and sacrificed 2 marriages on the altar of her career. Her only son, Austin, had grown up in a mansion, surrounded by private tutors, luxury cars, and the finest education money could buy. But all the wealth in the world could never fill the emptiness in his heart. Austin didn't want her money. He craved something far more elusive, her attention, her love. But Jennifer, caught in the relentless grind of building her empire, couldn't see it. So he disappeared. Without warning, without a word, Austin severed all ties. He changed his phone number, moved abroad, and left only a haunting message behind. I don't want your money. I want a mother, but I never had one. Don't pretend now. Jennifer never spoke about him again, not to the press, not to anyone. But the silence inside her grew louder every day, eating away at her, a gnawing ache she could never shake. Her empire, once her pride, now felt like an empty fortress, and the loss of her son was a wound that no amount of success could heal. One rainy evening, Jennifer Langston found herself walking down the dimly lit streets of the city, the sound of her heels echoing against the wet pavement. The storm had chased everyone indoors, leaving the streets eerily quiet. She wasn't paying attention to where she was going, lost in the tangled mess of her own thoughts. It was a moment of weakness, a rare lapse in her ironclad control. The world had been slipping away from her for months, and now it seemed like she was following its lead. Without thinking, she turned into an alley, one she didn't recognize, one that felt wrong. But it was too late to turn back. A shadow moved in front of her, followed by another, and then the voices came. A man's harsh shout, a woman's desperate plea. Jennifer froze as 2 men in black jackets pushed a woman against the cold brick wall. One of them swung a metal pipe menacingly. The other grabbed her purse, his grip tight and unforgiving. "Scream, and we finish it," one of them hissed, his voice dripping with malice. The woman's face was battered, blood streaking down her cheek, her hands trembling as she tried to shield herself. Her high heels were shattered, her dress torn. Everything about her screamed expensive, far too expensive for this part of town. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest, her body urging her to run. But then their eyes met. Just for a moment, the stranger's panicked, bruised eyes locked with hers. And in that split second, Jennifer felt something shift deep within her. It was as if the world had narrowed, the noise of the city silenced, and all that mattered was this woman and the desperate need to help. The men laughed as they stepped away, leaving the woman crumpled on the ground. They didn't care. They were gone in an instant, leaving nothing but the sound of their footsteps fading into the night. Jennifer didn't move at first. She stood frozen, staring at the woman's battered form until something in her snapped. She ran toward her. Kneeling beside the woman, her breath shallow, Jennifer could barely hear the faint whisper escaping her lips. "I'm going to call someone," she whispered, pulling a cracked burner phone from her pocket, her hands trembling as she dialed 911. "She's bleeding. She's hurt badly. Please, hurry." The woman's blood-streaked hand gripped her wrist, and Jennifer's heart stopped. Tears were running down the woman's face as she looked at Jennifer, her voice hoarse but full of gratitude. "You're the first person who didn't walk away," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jennifer's breath hitched. "If I die here, just know. You saved more than my life. You saved my faith in people." The words cut through Jennifer like a knife, and for the first time in years, she felt her heart crack wide open. Before she could respond, the woman added one final thing, her voice barely audible. "I wish my son had your heart." Those words were like a dagger to Jennifer's soul. She didn't know why, but in that moment, it was as if everything in her life, the emptiness, the silence, the loss, came rushing back, flooding her chest. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Here she was, standing on the edge of a street, trying to help a stranger, and yet it was her own heart that had been broken wide open. Malik Walker had nothing. No nameplate, no fancy clothes, no headlines, just the scar above his eyebrow, a reminder of a childhood spent in the cold, heartless world of foster homes. He hadn't been to school in months. Who cared? He was just another forgotten kid, another face in a sea of invisible souls. Most days he slept in doorways, scavenging what he could from dumpsters behind diners, picking up leftover sandwiches and discarded pastries. The city moved on around him, indifferent to his existence. He preferred it that way. People were crueler when they noticed him, when they saw the grime on his clothes and the desperation in his eyes. That night, like most others, Malik found refuge behind a dumpster near 6th Street, the warmth from the bakery next door making the damp air a little more bearable. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the cold at bay. The distant sound of laughter and clinking glass from the bars nearby felt like a world away, and for a moment Malik let himself relax. But then he heard it, shouting. A woman's voice, panicked and sharp. A man's voice, low and threatening. Another voice, deep and menacing. Without thinking, he peeked around the corner. 2 men in dark jackets had a woman pressed against a brick wall, one of them holding a metal pipe, the other clutching her purse. She was bleeding. The man with the pipe sneered at her, his words slithering out, "Scream and we finish it." Malik's heart raced. He wanted to hide, to blend into the shadows, but something inside him snapped when their eyes met. The woman's gaze was frantic, desperate, but for a split second, she saw him, really saw him. And in that moment, Malik felt it, the raw, aching need to help. It was like she had reached through the darkness and grabbed hold of something deep inside him, something he hadn't realized was there. He couldn't run now, not when she needed him. The men left her on the ground, laughing, their footsteps echoing down the alley as they disappeared into the night. Malik waited, breath caught in his throat, until they were gone. Then he ran. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he touched her bloodied arm. Her breath was shallow, barely audible. He pulled out the cracked burner phone from his pocket, dialing 911 with shaky fingers. "She's hurt bad. Please send someone now," he said, voice thick with urgency. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. But then she spoke. Her hand gripped his wrist, weak but steady, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "You're the first person who didn't walk away." Malik blinked, the words sinking into him like a stone. The tears that he never allowed himself to shed suddenly burned behind his eyes. She coughed, a harsh, painful sound. "If I die here," she rasped, "just know you saved more than my life. You saved my faith in people." He swallowed hard, his throat tight, and then, as if the universe itself had shattered, she added, "I wish my son had your heart." The words hit him like a freight train. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. She, a stranger, had said the one thing he had never been told in his life. He wasn't invisible to her. His heart ached, something inside him cracking open in a way he hadn't known was possible. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he wiped them away quickly, not wanting her to see the depth of his pain. This woman, this broken stranger, had given him something he never thought he'd have. Acknowledgement, humanity, the simple, rare gift of being seen. As the paramedics arrived and rushed the woman into the ambulance, Malik stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the night as silently as he had appeared. He didn't need thanks, didn't want them. He was used to being invisible, used to walking through the world unnoticed. It was safer that way, easier. But as he turned to leave, something in the air shifted. Something in him had shifted. The woman's whispered words echoed in his mind, each one cutting deeper than he cared to admit. "I wish my son had your heart." Malik couldn't shake the weight of her voice, the truth in her pain. He had seen the emptiness in her eyes, felt the rawness of her sorrow. And for the first time, someone had seen him, truly seen him. Not just the grime on his clothes or the scar on his face, but the heart beneath it all. For the next few days, those words haunted him. He couldn't forget the way she had looked at him, the way her frail hand had gripped his wrist like he was her lifeline. No one had ever looked at him like that before. No one had ever wished him something so human. Jennifer Langston woke in a sterile hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of machines and the sharp scent of antiseptic pulling her from unconsciousness. Her head throbbed, her ribs ached, and her vision was blurry, but she was alive. She tried to sit up, but a nurse gently pushed her back down, her soft voice offering comfort. "Easy, Miss Langston. You've been through a lot." Jennifer's breath hitched as the reality of the attack sank in. The boy. Where was he? She croaked, her throat raw from the ordeal. "Where's the boy?" The nurse blinked, confusion washing over her face. "What boy?" "The boy," Jennifer repeated, desperation creeping into her voice. "The one who called the ambulance. The one who stayed. He saved me." The nurse's expression softened, but she had no answer. Surveillance footage showed the men attacking her, the violence unfolding in the alley, but the camera angles never caught the boy's face. When the police arrived, they asked for a description, but all Jennifer could remember was his size, his youth, and the one thing that stuck in her mind. "All I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "is that he was small, young, and brave." She closed her eyes, the memory of the boy's actions replaying in her mind. And then she said it again, the words she couldn't forget. He was the first person who didn't walk away. 2 weeks passed before Jennifer was well enough to leave the hospital, but when she didn't return to her penthouse. She told her driver to take her to the farthest corners of the city, to shelters, food lines, and youth programs. She spent days searching, but it was as if Malik had vanished into thin air, like a ghost who didn't want to be found. Then, one evening, just before dusk, she spotted him. He was curled beneath an underpass, wrapped in a tattered jacket, a shopping cart beside him like an unspoken companion. Her heart tightened in her chest, and without a second thought, she stepped out of the car, walking slowly toward him. He opened one eye, startled, and jolted upright, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Wait." "Hey, it's you," she said, breathless. He backed away, a flash of fear crossing his face. "I didn't take anything," he muttered, defensive. "No," Jennifer said softly, holding her hands out in a gesture of peace. "You gave me everything." His eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding his features. "Why are you here?" Jennifer swallowed, her throat tight as she knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "Because you saved my life, and I haven't stopped thinking about you since. I owe you more than my life. I owe you a future." Malik didn't trust easily. He'd been burned too many times, but Jennifer didn't give up. She didn't promise him the world or flash her wealth. She simply showed up, every day, with food, with blankets, with nothing but her presence. She sat with him in silence, offering a quiet companionship he had never known, until slowly he began to believe. Slowly, he let her in. Jennifer's days blended into one long search, the urgency of her mission pushing her through the city's forgotten corners. She didn't stop at the shelters, the food lines, or the outreach programs. She combed through every dark alley, every underpass, every place where the lost souls of the city hid. She was relentless, following the threads of every lead, determined to find Malik. She wasn't just looking for the boy who had saved her life. She was searching for the piece of herself she had lost long ago, the part of her humanity that had slipped through the cracks of her self-made empire. Her obsession with finding him grew. Each night she returned to her penthouse, drained but undeterred, her mind haunted by the memory of his words. "You're the first person who didn't walk away." She hadn't realized how badly she needed someone to see her, to remind her that there was more to life than success and status, that there was still kindness in the world. And then one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, she saw him. It was in the dimming light near an old underpass that Jennifer spotted Malik, curled beneath a dirty blanket, his small body pressed against the cold concrete. He looked like a shadow of himself. The cart beside him, a poor excuse for comfort, his face hidden in the folds of his jacket. For a brief moment, her heart stopped. This was the boy who had saved her, and yet here he was, forgotten by the world, hiding in plain sight. She walked slowly toward him, every step carrying the weight of her desperation. Malik's eyes flickered open when he heard the sound of her footsteps, and the moment he saw her, his expression shifted from confusion to something more guarded, fear, perhaps, or mistrust. "Wait. It's you," she whispered, relief flooding her chest, but he immediately recoiled, pushing himself back against the cold wall. "I didn't take anything," he said quickly, his voice defensive, the fear evident in his tone. Jennifer stopped in her tracks, holding her hands out to him in a gesture of peace. "No," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotions rushing through her. "You gave me everything." Malik's brow furrowed, suspicion clouding his features as he backed away further, his arms crossing defensively. "Why are you here?" he demanded, eyes flickering between her and the street, as though he was ready to run at the slightest provocation. Jennifer lowered herself to the ground beside him, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Because you saved my life," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "And I haven't stopped thinking about you. Since that night, you've stayed with me in ways I can't explain. I owe you more than my life. I owe you a future." For a long moment, there was nothing but the hum of the city around them, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. Malik stared at her, his expression unreadable, and Jennifer gave him the space to process. Slowly, hesitantly, he seemed to lower his guard, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. "I don't need anything from you," he muttered, his voice smaller now, quieter, the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crumble. "I know," Jennifer said with a smile, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not here to offer you anything you don't want, but I can offer you this, time and space, and someone who's not going to walk away." She paused, letting the silence fill the space between them, then added, "You don't have to be invisible anymore." And just like that, without any grand gestures or promises, Jennifer began to rebuild the walls of Malik's broken world, one quiet step at a time. Each day she returned, bringing with her food, blankets, a chair to sit in beside him, and most importantly, her presence. Just being there, offering him the kind of stability and care he had never known. With every passing day, Malik began to trust her, slowly letting go of the anger and fear that had kept him hidden for so long. After weeks of showing up, of sitting in silence beside him, Jennifer finally broke through the walls Malik had carefully constructed around himself. She never pushed him, never tried to force him into a mold he wasn't ready for. She simply showed up, day after day, bringing food, blankets, and a quiet companionship that spoke volumes. Slowly, Malik began to let his guard down, the anger that had simmered for years starting to fade as the cold, lonely walls that had kept him trapped for so long began to crack. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the city in a soft glow, Jennifer found him sitting with his back against a crumbling pillar beneath the bridge, his face no longer masked by the anger that had once defined him. She had a feeling tonight might be different. She approached him slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment he saw her, he didn't retreat or look away. Instead, he met her gaze, his eyes still cautious, but no longer filled with distrust. He was quiet, but his posture had changed. He wasn't guarding himself from her anymore. He was simply waiting. Jennifer sat down beside him, offering him the sandwich she had brought, the familiar silence wrapping around them like a comfort. She didn't say anything at first, just took in the moment, this small breakthrough. She had done what no one else had been willing to do for him. She had stayed. Malik's voice, rough from disuse, broke the silence. "Why are you really helping me?" The question hit Jennifer harder than she expected. She had never been asked that before, not like this, not with the rawness of Malik's experiences behind it. She took a deep breath, her eyes soft as she turned to him. "Because, Malik, when I was at my lowest, when the world had walked away from me, you stayed. You didn't turn away. You saved me. And I'll never forget that." A long moment passed, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Malik didn't say anything for a while, his gaze fixed on the ground as if he were trying to process the depth of what she had just shared. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost shy. Can I call you Miss Jen?" Her heart swelled at the simplicity of the question, at the small crack in the armor he had worn for so long. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that spread across her face for the first time in a long while. "Only if I can call you kiddo." For the first time since she'd met him, Malik smiled, a small, tentative curve of his lips that made Jennifer's heart flutter. In that moment, she knew. No matter how difficult the road ahead would be, no matter the scars they both carried, they had crossed a bridge together. And this was just the beginning. The days that followed were filled with small victories, quiet moments of trust. Jennifer arranged for Malik to stay in a safe home, one where he could finally feel like he wasn't just surviving, but starting to live. She found a tutor for him, someone who could help him catch up on the education he had missed, and she arranged therapy for him, an opportunity to heal in ways he had never imagined. But it wasn't about fixing him. It was about giving him the chance to rebuild on his own terms, in his own time. And as Malik began to rebuild his life, Jennifer realized something profound. She was healing too. The emptiness that had haunted her, the silent loss of her son, was beginning to fill with something new, a sense of purpose, a connection, and the understanding that redemption wasn't just for the broken. It was for those who chose to love, even in the darkest of places. Months passed, and with each passing day, Malik grew more and more into himself, like a flower finally unfurling its petals after years of being trapped in darkness. The safe home Jennifer had arranged for him became a sanctuary, not just from the streets, but from the harsh, unforgiving world that had once made him feel invisible. His room, once sparse and cold, was now filled with things that brought him comfort. Books, a blanket that felt soft against his skin, and a small desk where he could finally study without the fear of being forgotten. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. For the first time in his life, Malik had space to breathe, to think, and to rebuild. Jennifer continued to show up, just like she always had. But now, her visits weren't just about survival. They were about growth, about hope. She had become a constant in his life, and for the first time, Malik didn't feel like he was a burden. They spent their evenings together, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes, Jennifer would share stories about her work, her past, or the struggles she'd faced, and Malik would listen, not with pity, but with understanding. He didn't know what it was like to have a mother, but he knew what it was like to be heard. And that, more than anything, was what kept him going. One night, as they sat across from each other at a small diner, the warmth of the meal before them filling the air with the scent of comfort, Malik asked her the question he'd been holding in for weeks. "Why are you really helping me?" Jennifer paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. The question was simple, but it was heavy, filled with layers of meaning that only Malik could fully understand. She set her fork down, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "Because, Malik, when no one else was there, when I thought the world had forgotten about me, you stayed. And that's something I'll never forget." Malik looked at her for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for something he couldn't name. And then, slowly, a small smile crept across his face, a smile that was more genuine than any he had ever given. "Can I call you Miss Jen?" Her heart caught in her throat, and she smiled, the warmth of the moment wrapping around them both like a hug. "Only if I can call you kiddo." In that instant, Jennifer realized just how far Malik had come. He wasn't the same boy who had been huddled in a cold alley, invisible and broken. He was someone who could finally see himself, who could finally allow himself to be seen. And she too was changing, letting go of the walls she'd built around her own heart, opening herself up to the idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond redemption either. Malik's healing didn't happen overnight, but it was happening. And Jennifer, as much as she had helped him, was healing too. Together, they were building something new, a future where no one had to walk alone, where even the most invisible souls could be seen, loved, and given the chance to rise again. A few months later, at a youth leadership summit sponsored by a foundation Jennifer had helped fund, the air buzzed with anticipation. The room was filled with bright young faces, eager to share their stories and dreams, but none stood out more than Malik. Dressed in a clean, button-up shirt and freshly pressed slacks, he walked to the podium with a quiet confidence, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come a long way since those days in the alley, and though the world around him had changed, he still couldn't quite believe he was here, standing in front of an audience that wanted to listen. The room grew still as Malik cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the crowd, seeking the one familiar face he knew would be there. Jennifer sat in the front row, her smile warm, her eyes filled with pride. It was the first time he had ever felt like he truly mattered, not just to Jennifer, but to the world. With a deep breath, he began. "I used to sleep in an alley," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "The kind of alley where no one sees you, where you don't matter, and the world just passes by without a second thought." He paused, letting his words sink in, the weight of his past hanging in the air. But then one day, I helped someone. I helped a woman who was hurt, who was afraid, and she saw me. She didn't walk away. She remembered me. Malik's throat tightened, the memory of that night still fresh in his mind. And that changed everything. Because when no one else saw me, when I was invisible to everyone else, someone saw me. And that made me realize that no one is invisible forever, not if just one person believes in you. He turned to Jennifer, his heart swelling with gratitude. And that person was you. The room erupted in applause. But Malik only had eyes for Jennifer. She had given him the greatest gift anyone could, the belief that he was worth something, that he was worthy of a future. As the applause washed over him, he felt a surge of warmth and pride, not just for himself, but for the woman who had shown him what love and kindness truly meant. Jennifer wiped away a tear, her heart full as she watched Malik stand tall, his head high. Once, he had been a boy lost in the shadows, but now he was someone who was giving others the strength to step into the light. As the applause continued, Jennifer realized that this was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had helped Malik find his voice, but in doing so, he had helped her find her own. Because once upon a time, she had nearly died in the dark, and now, here he was, the boy who had brought her back to life, standing proudly under the bright lights, sharing his story with the world. Together, they had healed. Together, they had risen. And together, they would continue to change the world, one heart at a time. Months after the summit, Jennifer couldn't shake the memory of the night she'd been attacked. The image of the two men still haunted her. But so did the boy, the one who had saved her without a second thought. She knew she couldn't just let it go, not when justice had yet to be served. The city was full of shadows, but this time, she wasn't going to let the darkness swallow the truth. With her resources, her connections, and the burning need to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, Jennifer set out to find the men who had tried to take everything from her and make them pay. She used every tool at her disposal: private detectives, security analysts, the finest tech experts. Nothing was going to stop her from bringing them to justice. The weeks turned into months as she tirelessly worked behind the scenes, tracing every lead, every piece of evidence, until finally, she had them. One of the men had tried to flee the country, while the other was found on an unrelated charge, the weapon he had used on her still in his possession. The evidence was irrefutable, and Jennifer's determination had finally paid off. The trial was swift. Jennifer, unwavering and calm, sat in the courtroom, her gaze sharp and steady. When she was called to testify, there was no fear, no hesitation. She spoke with the authority of someone who had fought through her own battles and had come out stronger on the other side. When asked why she pursued the case with such fervor, she didn't hesitate. Because boys like Malik, she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room, shouldn't live in a world where men like them walk free. The courtroom fell silent. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Jennifer felt a sense of peace. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making sure the world knew that people like Malik, people who had been forgotten, discarded, deserved a chance to live without fear. In the end, the men were convicted. They were locked away, their futures sealed by their own actions. But it wasn't the verdict that made Jennifer feel whole. It wasn't the sense of victory or revenge that filled her. It was the knowledge that in the process, she had given Malik something more than justice. She had given him a world where he no longer had to hide in the shadows, where he could stand tall and proud, knowing that he was seen, that he mattered. And as the months passed and life returned to a new rhythm, Jennifer realized something profound. She hadn't just fought for Malik's safety. She had fought for her own redemption, for a chance to make things right. And in doing so, she had found something more powerful than justice. She had found peace. 2 years later, the city was buzzing with excitement, the air filled with anticipation for the annual Youth Leadership Summit. But this time, something felt different. As the young leaders prepared to speak, the energy in the room was electric. Jennifer sat in the front row, her heart swelling with pride as she looked around at the sea of bright, eager faces. And then, just as the crowd fell silent, the microphone clicked on, and there he was, Malik. Dressed in a sharp, well-tailored suit, his face calm but confident, He stepped up to the podium. The room seemed to hold its breath. The same boy who had once been lost in the shadows of the streets, who had barely spoken a word to anyone, was now standing tall in front of an audience that admired him. Jennifer's heart swelled. She had watched him grow, watched him shed the layers of fear and doubt, and now here he was, speaking with purpose, with strength. He took a deep breath before he began, his voice clear and steady. "I used to sleep in an alley," Malik said, his words ringing out in the quiet room. "The kind where no one notices you, where you don't matter, where the world walks by like you're invisible. But one day, I helped someone, a woman who was hurt, who was afraid, and she saw me. She didn't walk away. She remembered me." Malik paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. His voice softened but carried the weight of his experience. And that moment changed everything. Because when no one else saw me, when I was invisible to the world, she believed in me. She made me believe in myself. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears as she watched him. The boy who had once been a stranger to the world, a boy who had given up hope, was now standing in front of a room full of people, sharing his story with pride. He had found his voice, and now his words were inspiring others. "No one is invisible forever," Malik continued, his voice gaining strength. "Not if just one person believes in you." And that person was her, Jennifer Langston, who didn't turn away, who didn't let me disappear into the shadows. He turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers. And for the first time, Jennifer saw a boy who had grown into a young man, someone who had found his place in the world. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice full of gratitude. "I wouldn't be here without you." The room erupted into applause, but in that moment, Jennifer could only see Malik. The boy who had once been broken was now standing tall, a beacon of hope for others, a living testament to the power of kindness, belief, and love. As the applause echoed around them, Jennifer felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming pride she felt for the boy who had changed her life, just as much as she had changed his. And as the applause continued, Jennifer realized something she hadn't fully grasped until this very moment. Malik wasn't just living for himself anymore. He was living for others, and in doing so, he had found his purpose. He had found his light. And now, the world was finally seeing him for who he truly was. Not just a boy who had survived, but a man who was destined to change the world. As the years rolled by, Jennifer's life, once defined by the relentless pursuit of success, took on a new meaning. The emptiness she had once felt, the hollow space left by Austin's absence, and the emotional void of her own brokenness had been filled in ways she never expected. It wasn't just through Malik's transformation, though that alone had been enough to change her world. It was through the love, the connection, and the sense of purpose she had rediscovered in herself. Malik had healed her as much as she had healed him, and in their shared journey, she found something deeper than any achievement her wealth could have bought: redemption. One day, as she sat in the quiet of her office, the walls lined with reminders of the empire she had built, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Malik. He had found a new path, one that led him to give back. He had enrolled in college, inspired to make a difference for others who had lived the way he had, invisible and forgotten. The message was simple, yet it carried a weight of emotion Jennifer had never expected. "Thank you for everything. I'm going to make sure no one else has to feel invisible again." Tears welled up in Jennifer's eyes as she read his words. It wasn't just the pride she felt for Malik's success, but for the way he had embraced the world again, his heart full and his future bright. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And through him, Jennifer realized that her own healing, her own shift in focus, was far more powerful than any accolade or public recognition. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking back to that rainy night in the alley, when everything had changed. She remembered the moment when Malik's eyes had met hers, the silent promise that neither of them would walk away from the darkness. And now, here they were, two people who had been lost, broken in different ways, but who had found each other, and in the process, found themselves. Jennifer knew her journey wasn't over, but it was different now. She no longer needed the empire to define her. She no longer needed to be the cold, untouchable figure the world saw her as. Her legacy was not in the billions of dollars she had accumulated, but in the lives she had touched, the people she had helped rise, and the belief she had rekindled in the forgotten. She had given Malik the chance to live, to dream, to be seen. And in return, he had shown her that the real power lay not in building things, but in rebuilding lives, starting with her own. And as she sat back in her chair, a quiet peace settled over her, knowing that in the end, it was love and kindness, not wealth and fame, that would outlast everything. Together, she and Malik had become something more than they could have ever imagined on their own. They had become a force for good, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the healing power of believing in someone when no one else will.